Hello, everyone. Welcome to another installment of Talking Marijuana. My name is Barry Kramer. I'm one of your hosts. I am the patient provider at California Patients Alliance. We're a GLACA accredited dispensary here in the city of Los Angeles. And with me today is
Yami Bolaños. I'm patient operator for Pure Life Alternative Wellness Center, which is now located at 6400 DeLongpre in Hollywood, California. I feel like a commercial or something. I'm also the founder and president of the Greater Los Angeles Collectives Alliance. An organization has set the standard in Los Angeles since 1996.
And in Sacramento, coming to us on Skype today. Let's see.
I'm Ron Dunkett, the California Director of Americans for Safe Access.
Awesome. I think look at that. There you are. Don, nice to see you in
morning,
Sacramento.
Darling.
We're getting very high tech here.
Great to hear you guys.
You're not seeing us today, huh?
I'm not seeing you, no.
All right, we'll keep that in mind. We'll keep that in mind. And our guest, one of our most favorite guests to come and visit us here at Talking Marijuana, Diane Waddles Goldstein.
Thank you very much, Barry.
And you are with LEAP, the Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, a fantastic organization that we're hoping to continue our relationship with. You guys always have incredible information, and you're doing such a great job in getting and disseminating that across the country, and we so appreciate that.
Yes.
We appreciate LEAP, personally appreciates every opportunity to get in front of an audience to talk about not just cannabis policy reform, but the greater goal of ending the war on drugs, period.
Absolutely. Well, today with Diane here, we're going to do a little bit of a free-for-all roundtable. We're going to do sort of another beginning of the year. We haven't had Diane with us since last year, and we'll talk a little bit about how she views the prospects moving forward into 2014. The landscape is changing quickly and steadily. Why don't we start with just what's going on in Sacramento, Don, and anything out of Sacramento with full-on regulations for the state of California?
Well, the legislative season has just started. Committee hearings started this week in Sacramento. And as you recall from last year, the process is that bills go through committee, and then they get voted on in one house, and they go through committee in the other house, and they get voted on again. So we're at the very beginning of that process, and we have some bills left over from last year that aren't finished yet. AB 604 is a bill by Tom Amiano, the Democrat from the San Francisco area. And Tom Amiano's bill would place regulatory control of medical cannabis in the Department of Alcoholic Beverage Control, which is sort of a controversial decision for Americans for Safe Access and some other advocates around the state. But that's the proposal on the table right now. And it would
Can you
also
explain
create a licensing program.
Don, can you explain the controversy there a little bit?
Sure. With AB 604, the controversy is that some of us are concerned that the ABC is an inappropriate regulatory body for medicine. ABC regulates tobacco and alcohol and vices. And of course, they do not regulate medicine. That's usually regulated in the Department of Health or some other area of the Department of Consumer Affairs. And so we're a little concerned that the ABC may be kind of enforcement-minded. As an example of what we're worried about with ABC is what's happening in Washington State, where the non-medical use of cannabis has started to interfere and step on the medical cannabis program.
Right.
And of course, they are actually regulated also by their alcohol board. And so we don't want to see that same dynamic in California. Having said that, we also recognize that regulation is very, very important to the state of California, and ASA is supporting AB 604 while we advocate for changes. We do want to see regulations in California. It's past time for that. So that's going to be a big debate that comes up this year. And it remains to be seen whether added to 604 will be a debate about bans on distribution and cultivation. This past year, we had two really unfortunate court decisions in California, one out of Riverside, where the Supreme Court ruled that cities and counties can ban distribution of medical cannabis, and then an appellate court decision that allows cities and counties to ban the actual cultivation of medical cannabis, and that includes personal patient cultivation. And so there's an appeal in the works on that decision, but it looks like we may be set up for sort of a double whammy with cities having the authority to ban both distribution and cultivation. And so we don't know yet if that's going to be added to AB 604 or if we need to some sort of solution for that, or if we need to find a separate legislative vehicle to deal with the distribution and cultivation situation.
And how would that play out as, I think at the end of the legislative season last year, we had a bill up for statewide regulation.
Steinberg's bill.
Steinberg's bill. And that failed to get through, but would Steinberg's bill supersede these other bills that are being, or would it be incorporated into it?
Not necessarily. The two bills, there was a bill by Darrell Steinberg, the Senate President Pro Tem, and then a bill by Assemblymember Amiano, and they didn't conflict with one another. Both bills were involved in a process called gutting and amending, which means that they were, at some point, all the provisions were removed, and then they were added back, new provisions were added back in. The Steinberg bill, as it stands now, would make enforcement against medical marijuana doctors who excessively recommend medical cannabis a higher priority for the medical board in California.
Absolutely.
And it would also protect the staff of collectives and cooperatives from certain kinds of prosecutions. So that's a really good bill, and we certainly support that and hope that it moves forward this year. And the Amiano bill now contains all the provisions about regulatory oversight in the ABC and the licensing of commercial medical cannabis activity. And let me remind all listeners, we're talking here about state regulations of commercial medical cannabis activity, not individual patients growing their own medicine.
So, Don, I have a question. With the Senate bill with Steinberg's, didn't it also not just protect the employees, but the operation and allow storefront collectives as long as they were nonprofit? And I think that's critically important when you start talking about point of sale and safe access, because that's in line with supporting exactly what GLAC has done and what you guys have done with the City of LA and Prop D. And
that's right. I was painting with a very broad brush before. What the bill says, it's SB 439, by the way, is the Steinberg bill.
All right.
What this bill says is that the collectives and cooperatives themselves are, so long as they comply with the Attorney General's guidelines published in 2008, which include nonprofit operation, that they would be protected from prosecution under the Health and Safety Code, and very importantly, protected from being regarded as what's called a nuisance per se. And that's the way that local jurisdictions have really cracked down on dispensaries, is to classify them as a nuisance right up front. And so then they lose a lot of their rights and due process. And so the 439 was important in that regard. It does also extend protection from prosecution to the staff and the officers of these organizations. So not only is the nonprofit organization protected, but the employees of that and the operators are protected as well. So a really good bill. And you know what I like about 439 is it's got a little bit of something for everybody. It protects the patients, collectives, cooperatives, and it also gives the law and order sorts a little stick to carry and say, hey, you doctors, get in line.
Yeah, we need more bills that offer both sides decent concessions so that we can agree on these bills and move forward.
You know, from a political standpoint, is LEAP has endorsed and supported both bills because I think they're both necessary. And I wanted to go back to what's happening in Washington for a second. And I think part of the issues of what's happening in Washington is exactly what's happening in California, is that they never fully regulated medical marijuana. And so it allows ABC to come in and become
And
that.
say, let's put them together.
Let's put it together. So I think this legislative session is going to be one of the most critical years for the industry and for patients' rights and for the viewpoint of cannabis as medicine, in addition to 2014, and we'll know by February, potentially could have a legal recreational adult model that I think will, if we can settle the medical regulations, will enhance and protect safe access and patients' rights.
Yeah.
I think you're right that that's the best case scenario unfolding in California. I do want to talk a little bit about patient rights, because there's something else on the agenda. Americans for Safe Access is hoping to sponsor legislation this session to protect patients from discrimination and access to health care. Most people don't realize that a medical cannabis patient in California has a legal defense in court. They're charged with a crime, but they don't have any civil protection for their civil rights. And one of the most heartbreaking aspects of medical cannabis that touches us and our family here very closely is the issue of organ transplants. Medical cannabis patients can be denied access to a new organ on a transplant list based solely on the fact that they use medical cannabis. This is based on some very old thinking of that cannabis is a drug of abuse, and that these people are drug users, and therefore they go down to the list or off the list altogether. And so people died waiting for organs because they're medical cannabis patients. And Yami, I know this is an issue that touches your life. And
Sure
so
does.
we wanna
For our
ask,
listeners that have not listened to how often we talk about this subject, why don't you go ahead and refresh us about
Well,
it?
I had a liver transplant 18 years ago at Stanford University. And about 5 years ago, I was told at UCLA that I would not be transplanted again if I rejected my liver because of my medical marijuana use. 6 months ago, I went to the hospital, and when I was discharged, the people at UCLA recommended that I use medical marijuana in my daily, regimen. And so I went to Sacramento with Don, and we said, hey, what's going on? How can they tell me no and then tell me yes? We need to clear this up. And I am someone that uses marijuana on a daily basis for my health. I don't use any other things. I don't use Tylenol. I don't take anything at all. All I use is marijuana. And I'm doing really, really well. And proof of that is that the doctors at UCLA say continue to use marijuana and go on your merry way. So this is something that's very near and dear to my heart and something that we're going to push through, right, Don?
Absolutely, we're gonna get this bill adopted because we can't let the issue of patients' rights slip off the radar while we're having this debate about commercial regulation. They're both very important. I also want to point out this organ transplant bill will protect people who use pain medication because many chronic pain patients are using medical cannabis to reduce the amount of opiate drugs they have to take. And those people are also in danger of discrimination. They often are denied access to their opiate medicines if their medical cannabis use is discovered. And again, this is based on completely spurious logic that this their cannabis use is drug abuse, and therefore they can't be trusted with opiate drugs. This is impacting veterans a lot. We have a lot of veterans coming back from the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. With chronic pain issues that they're dealing with, and the VA is sometimes takes a very hard line with this, and private doctors do as well. And so we really need to protect those people. And I'm happy to report this isn't completely off the wall. You know, sometimes when you come into Sacramento with a new idea, it can take a few years to
Make its
get
way
people
through
on board with it and build support. But there's already a provision in the Health and Safety Code that protects people from being denied an organ transplant based on their diagnosis of mental illness. And so we're not really asking lawmakers to go too far out on a limb because this kind of protection already exists somewhere else in the Health and Safety Code. So,
I'm sorry, Don. Go ahead.
Please.
Well, I think you brought up a couple things that are so significantly important, and one of those is safe access for veterans. And for the audience, what I would encourage all veterans is not only to become involved with ASA on a national basis, but on a local basis, but go to the Drug Policy Alliance, and they have a new campaign that I was fortunate enough that they flew me back to New Mexico to do and moderate a full 8-hour day called The Freedom to Choose. And it was absolutely amazing how many veterans are now starting literally to come out of the woodwork and talk about the same results that you've had from a physical ailment standpoint that are now saying, oh my God, I'm back. I'm able to be a loving father, a wife, a husband. And we have really done a disservice to our veterans in America by disallowing and prohibiting the use of medical marijuana for PTSD. Look at all the MAPS research. And I think that, for me, is the most important point of why I'm so passionate with LEAP, is that our government has lied to us.
Yeah.
I was part of that.
Yeah.
And in the sense of, although I never believed the lies, I had to do my job. And everybody reaches a point, and with LEAP, you look at all our different stories about why we do what we do for no pay, and it's time to end the lies, the corruption, and all the damage that prohibition does to our society. And you see it every single day with what you guys do. And I know you see the stories much more so than I do, Don.
I would say, though, to add to that discussion, am I correct in saying that the VA is the first government agency to tacitly allow, in states that allow for medical marijuana, they will allow soldiers to take that medical marijuana, but they won't allow their doctors to recommend it.
Correct.
But they've bent the law to a degree.
they don't necessarily allow it. They allow the doctors to allow it. So there's
Yeah.
some leeway there, but there's no guarantee that if you're a medical cannabis patient in a legal state, that the VA will tolerate
Right,
your
we don't
use.
have a
They have
guarantee.
the option to tolerate your use.
Interesting enough, if you talk about kind of the evolution of society, Roger Goodell, the commissioner of the NFL, which I'm a big football fan, recently came out and said that they are going to relook at the marijuana policy in the NFL because of both legal and medical usage now. And he basically came out and said that the bottom line is if medical marijuana helps NFL players deal with pain, then
Exactly.
they should look at it.
Absolutely.
You know, it's huge. That's a big deal.
It is
It
huge.
is. It's
I mean, we've
huge.
all through last year there were attempts to goad the NFL into kind of coming out with this, and the fact that he's come out and made that statement and is looking into this and using marijuana for pain management. An effective, non-invasive medicine that
Yeah.
doesn't, destroy your
Liver.
life.
And works.
And works. And
because,
works
yeah, it
for
works.
people.
That's all I use.
Was
you
very
know,
excited about that
Yeah, it's really
that
good.
movement ahead. That's going to be really good. Let's take a little break. We'll come back. I would like to talk a little bit more about Washington and what's going on there because there's been a little bit of a development toward trying to resolve the medical versus legal. And we'll talk a little bit about that when we come back and many other things.
Perfect.
We'll see you on the other side.
Upcoming shows to the John Lovitz Vodcast Network.
Welcome to FYI. It's Dimitri Young here with Robert Fick.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to Talking Marijuana.
Hi, everybody. Crabman's Rock and Roll Revival featuring Frazier Smith is on the air, in your hair, and going out everywhere around the world.
I'm Gary Garver, live from the John Lovitz Comedy Club.
This is the John Lovitz Podcast Network.
Hi, John Lovitz here. It's time to put laughter back into your life. Check out the John Lovitz Comedy Club, located in the heart of Universal Studios City Walk, Los Angeles, not Orlando. For tickets, go to thejohnlovitzcomedyclub.com.
You are listening to the John Lovitz Podcast Network.
And welcome back to Talking Marijuana with our guest today, Diane Goldstein from LEAP, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. We were all over the map before the end of before the end of the last segment, but we had been talking a little bit about Washington and the disparity between the medical marijuana program, which already exists, and the new I-502, the legalization law. We've covered this a bit on the show, and people that have listened to us in the past know that we've been talking about this. The liquor board controls marijuana. Don was mentioning that earlier in the segment. They came up with recommendations. Many were quite onerous to medical marijuana patients, and there's been a huge backlash. To the liquor board's credit, they adapted a little bit, but it was very little where they moved to allow medical patients to continue to have the rights that they have. And one of the great things in Washington is that they have an elected representative. I think her name is Senator Coles Wells.
Yeah.
And she has been a fierce advocate for medical marijuana to protect patients' rights in all of this I-502 legalization that's been happening. And so as they come back into session, I believe even this week, I was reading in an article, she has a proposal to help alleviate some of the more onerous segments of I-502 for medical marijuana. And it might be their last-ditch effort at this point to fix that before it all goes into effect. It's undergoing final adjustments, but the key difference is that patients with authorization cards would be able to purchase cannabis without the retailer excise and sales tax, so that people that are getting medicine don't have this extra price to go on. It attempts to increase the possession amounts and the number of plants that patients are allotted to grow. And she would also like to find a way to allow additional I-502 stores that are strictly medical stores. So those are three proposals that do help alleviate some of those onerous sections of I-502. But I-502 is moving forward, and we're going to see how the legislature takes the recommendations of the Liquor Board,
And moves them.
and then we'll have something more solid to kind of discuss and talk about and move forward.
I want to say, Barry, I'll interject that I think it's a great example, even though it's a small victory and limited in scope. It's a great example of people getting organized and being effective.
Absolutely.
In the community, and we've talked to some of the folks up there here on the show and outside, and they've really done a great job of pushing back on this. So kudos to the folks on the ground in Washington State.
To me, it seems, and we spoke a little bit about this before the show, that the marijuana issues are moving at a breakneck speed right now, faster than they've ever moved in my lifetime that I can recall, and because of that, I find that some organizations, some legislatures hold back. They want to see where the pulse is moving to before they make decisions.
Sure.
Also, it has introduced a glut of information into the public knowledge, some of that information being somewhat misleading. It's almost like, I was thinking the other day, it's almost like when you're watching the news and a crisis happens, maybe the Boston Marathon crisis that happened, or 9/11, those things where the first reports, that first day of reporting is full of whatever somebody's soundbite was, and then that takes off and goes. And for a while, we're working with misinformation.
Yes.
That's happening in cannabis right now around the country. We're getting all this great forward movement. And because people need to simplify it to get it out to the public, some things are, I believe, becoming sort of a little warped in their delivery to the public.
Well, I think it's because of the media coverage. It's
Exactly.
there's a lot of really interesting things when you start talking about what came first, the chicken or the egg. Now, I'm going to say that one of the reasons I think that things have moved so quickly has been not because of mainstream media. It's been because of alternative media and
And the internet.
technology and
Absolutely.
the internet, which force mainstream media to start having to look at drug policy reform, period, not just the issues around marijuana as a smart policy decision, and which is one of the things that I write about a lot is that we are not outliers anymore. So, for example, here's a Katie Couric soccer mom poll is the best way to describe it. She's getting ready to do a show on marijuana, obviously after the implementation of Colorado. And even the soccer moms and Katie Couric fans overwhelmingly right now say that 89.98% have voted for legalizing and accepting adult recreational marijuana use. Take a look at what happened in Colorado now. Fully implemented, $5 million in 1 week, long, peaceful lines of not a single kid, and that's $5 million that did not go into the hands of the drug cartels or criminals.
Absolutely.
That's a success. Now, like anything else, we're going to have to deal with issues of training. Barry and I were having the discussion about marijuana impairment and how does law enforcement really deal with that. And part of the problem is DUI training has been very alcohol-centric, based on field sobriety tests and blood testing and everything else. And it's really now time to take what the industry has done, which is recognize that cannabis can be a combination. It could be something similar to an opiate. It could be something similar to where it's a much more uplifting, and we have to go to the experts in the cannabis field, bring them together with scientists and develop a research study to really do impairment testing to set standards that are constitutional, that don't violate people's rights.
And that are based in science.
And are based on science, not on
arbitrary.
a zero tolerance per se level,
Right.
that basically just put a lot of people into jail that shouldn't be there. And all that has happened not because of the mainstream media, but they're there just selling little 30-second sound bites. I mean, Bill O'Reilly, oh my goodness, the no spin zone this year. I was so happy to see people like,
Chris Hayes took him to
Dr.
task
Carl
here.
Hart took him to heart, Chris Hayes. when Bill O'Reilly gets on the air and says no one gets arrested for marijuana,
Only
and then
dealers.
only
Only
dealers,
dealers.
and then you have the 750,000 arrests a year that do happen. You know, it's those types of things that the media needs to start ignoring and dealing with. Now, let's really talk about policy and what's happening and occurring with boots on the ground.
Chris Hayes said Bill O'Reilly is not the first older, privileged white guy to express a lack of understanding of the devastating impact that marijuana arrests can have. But we thank him for reminding us of an all-important truth. Just because something bad doesn't happen to people you know doesn't mean it doesn't happen at all. And
Absolutely.
people are suffering, and their families are suffering, their children are suffering for needless possession
Yeah,
arrests.
and you know what? Quite frankly, even cultivation,
Yeah.
and even sales. I mean, you know, we can talk about all the federal prisoners that are in there for 20 years plus for, you know, cultivation or selling marijuana. And I think that's the things that we need to continue to focus on. Is we have facts and science on our side and evidence. And everybody else is starting to come to that realization. Now we just have to drag our politicians kicking and screaming. So, Dawn,
drink the water.
there's a great candidate in Napa Valley who's running for the 4th Assembly seat. I was at the Emerald Cup and attended the industry breakfast. His name is Matt Pope, and he is a former reserve officer for Fremont Police Department, and he is pro medical cannabis industry, pro-patient, and pro-adult recreational. And I think that you probably ought to go have a meet with him.
Go home and see what's up.
Yeah, I will absolutely say we talk cop talk, and he gets it, and I sent him money, and I think that's the...
And we need people like that in our legislature.
And that's the maturation of our movement.
Right. We need educated people, and that's what your movement is helping to do,
Yes.
to educate people. And we talk about that extensively here on Talking Marijuana. Education is the key.
I might be on Matt's mailing list.
Yeah.
Really? Yeah, that'd be good. Well, we need to support local politicians all across the country, here in California for sure, to get our legislature going, but to that support in a knowledgeable way, medical marijuana, patients' rights, and legal
Recreational use.
Recreational use is coming to California.
it's coming.
So let's get a legislature that
Accepted,
understands it, that's educated, and can regulate that industry before we get into it, so that we're on the right path.
Absolutely. And, you know, it's interesting. There really has been. There are times where I just wrote kind of a pessimistic piece about everything that happened with regard to drug policy reform, except for in California. And what I have to remind myself is, even though maybe we aren't where we should be, or where I feel that we should be, but there were some positive things. Look at the Sebastopol
yes.
Mayor Robert
yeah.
Robert
Jacobs,
Jacobs, yeah.
that just got elected as a state
Mayor.
compliant dispensary owner, which tells you that we're moving across. And it also tells you the fear of politicians, because David Frum, there was a great New York Times piece, and David Frum on a Twitter feed basically called him a drug dealer.
Yeah.
So we know we're winning because our opponents, whether it's Chabot or Sabet or David Frum or Kennedy, refuse to engage us in legitimate rational discourse and resort to name calling.
Yeah.
We know we've won at that
Yes.
point.
They're in an old paradigm,
Yeah,
those
they are.
guys. They really are operating out
Yeah.
of ignorance of the
And
whole
fear.
It's
subject
fear.
in its own.
And
In its
fear.
own. Yeah, and it's and they get a lot of airtime. They certainly do. All of
Sure.
those people, Frum and
It's
Kennedy.
an aspect of our media coverage, right? That these bozos get airtime because some producers think that you have to have two opposing views and you have to have the most crazy reactionary guy
Yeah.
that you can find, and that passes for cable news coverage. It's
Right.
make you miss the days of the old broadcasters who were rational and
Sure.
researched and came with facts
For sure.
instead of controversy.
But there was sure some very positive media based on Colorado, and I think as a whole that we need to take that and continue to move forward.
Well,
We were
what-
talking last week about Colorado, that the big scandal that broke, the big story with the lines were too long. So that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, really, that's the worst thing that happens.
Yeah.
Congratulations, Colorado. Lost my thought on where I was going. I do that a lot, don't I, on this show? And I haven't even medicated
That's a side
today.
effect of your medicine.
Oh, my goodness. I was going to ask you, Diane, you're talking a little bit about what happened in 2013 and that there were some good things. How do you, from your law enforcement perspective, see 2014 moving forward? Is it a plus year for us or a equal year for us? Do we make some headway in this year?
I'm going to be the glass half full.
Okay.
Okay.
Nice.
I have some major concerns in California simply because of the power base of the California Police Chiefs and the California Narcotics Officers Association. And I think that, and something that's been clearly lacking from a strategic standpoint amongst all of us, okay? And this is, whether it's LEAP or the DPA or ASA or CCPR or NORML, none of us have sat down together to talk about how we create a strategy that is both cohesive and collaborative to undermine the strength and the influence that they have. And I think it's at a point that we need to, because those two groups are basically the Kevin Sabet and the Paul Chabots that fully believe that they're going to do everything they can, no matter what. And Paul Chabot's a classic example of that with the false arrest suit, the false arrest, and then Lanny Swerdlow winning. And in fact, I'm about to publish an article called My Drug War Attica of the Year, and I'm giving it to Paul Chabot. And so we need to, and he's running for the 4th Assembly. And what he did, in my mind, as a true peace officer, because Paul Chabot never was, is that he basically used the office and the obligations of a peace officer to set up an ideology. It's officious. It was against our code of ethics. Yet he's got a voice, and we need to defang that monster. And I think through the Lanny Swerdlow lawsuit, we can. We need to basically ensure that anybody who votes for him understands he's a liar and that he will do anything at any cost. And why would you trust someone like that?
Why would you trust that? Yeah.
So,
with
Diane,
our laws.
it's Don. One of the things that I was happy to see this year in the state legislature was what I perceived to be a sort of thinning of the influence of law enforcement, especially the California Narcotics Officers Association. And I was really happy to see that the Police Chiefs Association did not oppose AB 604. They actually stood aside on that bill, although many lobbyists were very vocal in opposition to it. And so I think we're chipping away at this thing with law enforcement opposing medical cannabis. And one of the things that I've been seeing is that less and less am I hearing in these offices when I talk to staff and members, less and less am I hearing, we get it, but we do what the police say. And I used to hear that a lot, and I'm hearing it less and less. So we're chipping away at that, but there's a lot more work to be done, because really, so far, lobbyists and law enforcement in California have opposed every single cannabis bill. They just oppose it on principle.
Yeah.
And I hope we're moving away from that. I think they were less of an obstacle this past year than they ever were before, although they're still very formidable opponents.
Yeah.
And I think, Diane, picking up on what you were saying, on the opposite of the law enforcement side, you have the advocacy side, and that's a bit fractured here in our very large state.
Yes.
And there needs to be some cohesiveness within our advocacy groups, or we will continue to fight each other at the loss of getting any kind of progress forward.
Yeah.
We see that happening.
We do, Barry, although let me also point out that, and I think the advocacy groups do a passable job of getting along with one another. Where I really find a lot of frustration in Sacramento, and I think we see the same thing in Washington, D.C.
You know what, Don? Let's get back with your frustration after this little break that we're going to take. Right. It's a nice time to break, and we're eager to hear why you're frustrated. So we'll come back and continue our talking to 2014. Thanks a lot. We'll be right back.
This This is the John Lovitz Vodcast Network.
Upcoming shows to the John Lovitz Vodcast Network.
Welcome to FYI. It's Dimitri Young here with Robert Fick.
Hey everybody, welcome to Talking Marijuana.
Hi, everybody. Crabman's Rock and Roll Revival featuring Frazier Smith is on the air, in your hair, and going out everywhere around the world.
I'm Gary Garver, live from the John Lovitz Comedy Club.
This is the John Lovitz Vodcast Network.
Hi, John Lovitz here. It's time to put laughter back into your life. Check out the John Lovitz Comedy Club, located in the heart of Universal Studios City Walk, Los Angeles, not Orlando. For tickets, go to thejohnlovitzcomedyclub.com.
You are listening to the John Lovitz Vodcast Network.
And welcome back to Talking Marijuana. We're your hosts. I'm Barry Kramer.
I'm Yami Bolaños.
And we have Don Duncan in Sacramento via Skype. Hello. Our guest today is Diane Goldstein from LEAP, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. And Don, right before the break, you were frustrated. Are you still frustrated?
I am frustrated. I was saying, there's obviously a lot of, within a grassroots movement, there's always disagreement and some lack of coordination. But what I really find frustrating in terms of lobbying in Sacramento and in Washington, D.C., isn't so much that the advocacy organizations or the activists are always at each other's throat, is that the lobbyists are very often working at cross purposes.
Yep.
And I always draw a distinction between a lobbyist and an advocate, because an advocate is there for a cause and for a mission, and a lobbyist is there for a client. And I think one thing that we should address in our community is that many of us, and I'm not naming names today, but many of the people who are players in the medical cannabis industry employ their own lobbyists and send them in to advocate for things that only represent their interest. And that's a problem. It's really a problem when we go in and there's confusion amongst lawmakers and their staff about what patients want, because every economic interest in the industry has their own lobbyist
Right.
lobbying for their own thing. And I guess that happens in every issue, but it certainly doesn't make my job any easier when I go out there and try to bring a patient's voice to the table in Sacramento.
Do you see any kind of resolve to this happening? I mean, we've had an explosion of it, so is there any way to rein that in? No.
This is how this game gets played in legislative politics, and unfortunately, I think it's just a factor we have to deal with. But I think sometimes when people look at the movement and say it's so fractured, it's less fractured than it might appear if there weren't all these hired guns running around with their press releases and talking points and sniping at each other on the internet. It might not seem quite so divisive.
Yeah, that's true. True. I came across an article this week that was from Vice magazine. That
I love Vice.
Yeah, we love them. And they were talking about, the headline is Legalizing Pot Makes Police Departments Poorer. Since we have you on, I thought that would be a nice topic to talk about. But they're basically talking that in Washington State, they're arresting less people. They're not doing the raids, which have asset forfeiture, because it's legal there now. And due to that fact, the police department, there's nowhere in the money that's been carved out from tax collection to give to the police department. So they're basically just going to be losing millions of dollars, which I think their budgets have been buffered by for quite a long time. So I'm not concerned about that, but I'd like your take on it.
It's such a nuanced topic, but it brings me back down to policing for profit. Okay, one of the things that LEAP has long advocated against is, in fact, policing for profit. And part of the issue with policing for profit, and it's caused directly by the federal government in their interference with states' rights. So what they do is, let's just talk about civil asset forfeiture, is in California and in other states, is the legislation has protected citizens of their states from having law enforcement come in and take their assets. There's a higher standard. Some states you have to be criminally convicted, which is what I support before we do any type of asset forfeiture. In other states, it's a higher burden of standard than the federal equitable sharing. Well, law enforcement, just like the CNOA has done in undermining the medical marijuana law, knows exactly how to undermine states' asset forfeiture laws, because what they do is they go to the feds and they have their case adopted under a civil federal asset forfeiture called equitable sharing. And within the equitable sharing, what happens is the local law enforcement agency gets 80% and the federal government gets 20%. So if you go back and you start taking a look at the federal funding for asset forfeiture, what you will see literally since the 1980s is federal asset forfeiture is now completely self-funded through civil asset forfeiture, and most of that money is not from like a Bernie Madoff, okay, or somebody else. It's based on drug money, and it's not based on kingpin money normally. It's based on asset forfeiture from traffic stops, and someone has $5,000 cash because a dope dog allegedly hit on it.
Right.
And I think that's one of the issues that, yeah, they may be poor or short term. They're going to have to reprioritize their budgets. But if the federal government was smart, they would take burn jag grant money, and instead of funding narcotics teams or fusion centers for HIDTA, maybe they should fund overtime for violent crime task force.
Right. Use the money.
Exactly.
better.
Appropriately. Yes, smartly.
Gee, smartly. You know, it
Definitely should not have law enforcement working on commission. That's just a recipe for injustice.
Absolutely. And you look at it. Oklahoma recently had a scandal based on federal asset forfeiture. They hired a retired cop company that all they do is teach people how to do asset forfeiture, traffic interdiction. And in Oklahoma, they allowed non-police officers to pull over people and take their money. Total violation of the law. You know, you start talking about, Judge Jim Gray, who's my mentor in Toledo, has said this. If you start looking at our society as a whole, drug prohibition has touched every single thing that makes our community safer, whether it's education, health, the criminal justice system, taxes, everything. And if we simply start by ending prohibition, getting the federal government out of it, and allowing a state-by-state solution, just like what we did with alcohol prohibition, we as a society would be much better off.
Well, I hope we work toward that.
Oh.
Yeah. The prioritizing of asset forfeiture now in Washington, this particular article says might shift. And to me, it sounds like a shift toward where it really should be.
It should be.
Which is in hard narcotics and fighting. I feel like, as a layperson, I feel like the police in general, not in specific, but in general, had laid off those kinds of priorities and went after marijuana because we were easy. I'm sitting in my dispensary.
Barry, it's called low-hanging fruit.
Low-hanging fruit,
and
absolutely.
It's interesting. So I know this group probably doesn't read police1.com, but
I forgot to
but,
do that.
But I do. Okay, and it's really interesting with the change in Colorado. Is the editor did an article on what's the future of marijuana for law enforcement. Just came out. They've done 3 different polls. They did a 2009, a 2011, very unscientific voluntary poll. Should pot be legalized? And, what are you high? Yes, depends on what regulatory process. They had 4 questions. Since the last time this poll was done, which was 2011, they've seen a spike in 10 points by law enforcement that says, yes, marijuana should be legalized. It's coming. Or yes, depending on what type of regulatory system. In 2 years, on Police One, 10-point spike. And then you go down further into the comments because I did it in the 2011 and I did it in 2009. The comments are even changing where cops are coming out and saying, are you kidding? Now, it's not as many as we would like.
Sure.
And so even law enforcement is recognizing that, you know what?
But if in 2 years you got 10%, maybe in 5 years you've got a sea change.
Yeah, and it's significant and it validates, even though it's unscientific, really the polling that's been done by Gallup, Rasmussen, Reason Reap.
58% of Americans now.
Yeah.
In a short number of years.
The CNN poll, I mean, there's just
Yeah.
It's staggering, and I think that's what scares politicians. And as I call, like, Chabot and Sabet and Frum and everybody else, and we'll being LA people will love this. They're like the dinosaurs stuck in the La Brea tar pits, and they're slowly dying, and they just don't recognize it. They know something's going on, but they don't know what to do about it. And you know what? As a cohort, they're dying off, and I don't wish them to die in any way, shape, or form, because that would be horrible. But you know what?
Decrease their voices.
Their voices, their relevancy is decreasing. And it's our millennials, our smart, young, hip people, and people like me who, as a Republican, it's like, wait a minute, this is a true Republican position. This is a small government position. This is a true conservative position.
Right.
Period, simple, end of story.
We were talking about small government, big government. Florida, we've talked about Florida here quite a bit. I read an article recently that they're, still debating this question of whether they should have the medical or not. And Florida is, oh my God, again, I have so many thoughts in my head about what I want to say that they just don't come out.
I lived there for 9 months.
It really, I have not figured out a way with this show to keep things together. I have my iPad. I try to make it all work. But I might even have something about this in Florida. It says that their politicians are looking out of touch. But, this was why.
Yeah.
The hypocrisy in the politics right now. Florida wants big government, out of your health care decisions. We're talking Obamacare.
Yes.
Yeah.
However, when it comes to this decision about your health care, whether your physician should be able to give you a recommendation to take medical marijuana, they want 100% government in there telling them what to do.
Yeah.
This cannot go on.
Yeah.
I mean, that disparity
Yeah.
has to move forward as we go forward.
Yes, go forward it's convenient for
Yeah.
them.
Well,
absolutely.
it's interesting, though, because it's only because, like in Orange County, oh my goodness, I live it's like Florida down there when it comes to politics.
Right.
And I'm dealing with a group of very much libertarian-leaning Republicans that we are trying to influence the Republican Party from within. And, although they agree on hemp at this point,
Right.
people are, other than Dana Rohrabacher.
Kicking and screaming.
Other than like Dana Rohrabacher, people are kind of like, it's the soccer mom issue. It's what about the kids?
What about the kids?
And
What about the kids?
Exactly. Thank you.
I mean, a child cannot walk into my store to acquire anything.
Yeah.
They got to get it from their parent that left it laid around.
And
didn't
that's
take
the
care of it.
problem. It's personal responsibility.
And one of the things I'm hearing a lot in the media now, in the last month, let's say, is that this situation of people abusing that right is, we don't see it. We've had medical marijuana in over 15 states for over 10 years now, and there is no evidence to say that crime has gone up, that
Correct.
more children are smoking marijuana. There's just not evidence for it. In fact,
Quite the contrary, yeah.
Quite the
evidence
contrary.
shows that's not happening.
quite the
Don,
contrary.
I'll send you the training matrix that I received on the California Narcotics Officers Association, their medical marijuana.
Oh, good. Yes, I would love to have a look at that.
It is, well, first, we can have this discussion off topic, but their course has not been audited in 3 years.
You know what, Diane? Let's have that discussion when we come back
Okay.
from this break. Our last break, and we'll come back and then we'll have this discussion and just a few more topics we're going to hit on. Okay, we'll see you after the break.
Which John?
You are listening to the John Lovitz Vodcast Network.
Upcoming shows to the John Lovitz Vodcast Network.
Welcome to FYI. It's Dimitri Young here with Robert Fick.
Hey everybody, welcome to Talking Marijuana.
Hi, everybody. Crabman's Rock and Roll Revival featuring Frazier Smith is on the air, in your hair, and going out everywhere around the world.
I'm Gary Garver, live from the John Lovitz Comedy Club.
This is the John Lovitz Vodcast Network.
Hi, John Lovitz here. It's time to put laughter back into your life. Check out the John Lovitz Comedy Club, located in the heart of Universal Studios City Walk, Los Angeles, not Orlando. For tickets, go to thejohnlovitzcomedyclub.com.
You are listening to the John Lovitz Vodcast Network.
Yeah, now we're back.
We're back.
We're back.
Back.
We are back with Diane Goldstein from LEAP, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, and you were making a point right before the break.
So we need to talk about training issues and training standards, which really impacts law enforcement critically. I've written a couple articles challenging the California narcotics officers and the California police chiefs with regard to their lobbying activity and how they're being disingenuous because they also profit from maintaining the status quo.
Yeah.
So let me explain quite clearly, is the California Narcotics Officers Association is not they're a 501c4. They're a professional training organization. One of the things they do is they receive a potload of money, Don. I have their taxes, okay?
Is that a new expression? I like it.
A potload of money.
A potload of money.
That means very little.
Very
right?
little, yeah. So if you pull their taxes, which are on the Attorney General's website, they make between $2 to $3 million a year in doing training for law enforcement organizations. Now,
Crazy.
it's not private money, okay? And that's the misnomer because it's a very nuanced thing. In
Which is
California,
annoying because these guys act as private lobbyists essentially. They're
Correct.
not representing the public trust at all.
they're not. So what you have to understand is California Peace Officer Standards and Training accredits all law enforcement agencies. You have to go through X amount of training, Academy certified accreditation standards. So Post accredits CNOA training and has for years. By accrediting their training, they also can pay law enforcement agencies back with taxpayer money for sending their officers to specific training. So there's different levels of training. So Post basically either pays directly or indirectly to California Narcotics Officers Association and the way that's done. For example, their medical marijuana or training component that has been horrific, which is all about take their pot away, make them go to court. There is no medical marijuana. I mean, I have the curriculum.
Right. Absolutely
Okay.
solid.
Is Post reimburses the law enforcement agencies for the officer's salary and for the lunch or however it takes to get them there. And then law enforcement pays the very minimal $35 fee to go. They have trained thousands of police officers since 1996 on how to undermine the law. No one is calling out the narcs for being disingenuous because if we in fact appropriately regulate medical marijuana or adult legal recreational marijuana, they're going to lose a lot of money. So they use that money to pay Lovell, and I did an analysis, and
It's insidious
since
sometimes. How they use
since
this.
2003, the chiefs and the narcs have paid John Lovell like something like $1.3 million.
And we're talking taxpayer.
Well,
money. Ish.
it's taxpayer-ish money, because for so example, like the California Chiefs.
Patient-ish money.
Yes,
to
yes. So
push our
the
stuff forward.
California Chiefs has membership dues, and that membership dues is basically a sliding scale fee depending on how large the police agency is. Well, there's not a single chief that pays their own membership dues. Their city pays membership dues. And that city's money goes into direct lobbying against any drug policy reform. Nobody seems to think this is an issue. And so again, that's a legislative issue that we need to deal with. But the training issue, the legislator can deal with, because they control the purse strings to the California Peace Officer Standards and Training.
What do you think about that, Don?
That is good to know. And, I think a lot of people don't think about the fact very often that, when we think about the voice of law enforcement, we think about the poor beat cop pleading his cause in the state capitol. But it's not. It's a really slick, well-funded professional lobby organization.
Yeah.
That is not accountable to the citizens who are being policed, but to the economic interest of the organizations. And so
And
it's good
it's
stuff.
for profit.
Well,
I
yeah.
just can't believe that part of it, that it's for profit. It's supposed to be a community-minded thing. I mean, am I that?
Well, I was busting up on lobbyists earlier, and here's another example of how our civic process is sort of derailed sometimes by special interest and money.
Crony capitalism at its worst.
Yeah.
We can all talk about it, and I think when you start talking about advocacy, is one of the things that law enforcement has forgotten is the only reason that people really should use lobbyists is because they don't have access to politicians or to our legislators.
Right.
What legislator is going to turn down the voice of a police chief? They don't need a lobbyist organization.
Yeah.
No, I agree with that.
Yeah.
100%.
There are some laws that try to create transparency in the funding, but people don't know how to go about that. And there's definitely work to be done in letting people know who pays. Like if somebody goes as a spokesperson, who's paying that person to be there to advocate, to lobby, and what have you? Because it's always very telling where the money comes from.
Yeah, it's interesting, these drug-free coalitions, because that's my whole new thing. An article that I'm mulling around is called The Pot Lobby, and who really is the pot lobby? And when you look at it, if you start looking again, that's the federal funding issue, is last year the federal government allocated over $92 million to fund drug-free coalitions. Also, CADCA literally gets something like over $6 million a year in state and federal grant funding, and then the rest is private money, which includes alcohol, drug testing, corporations, and other groups that benefit from this drug-free status quo stuff. But no one calls out CADCA when they pay their CEO over $300 or close to $350,000 a year. So as a advocate for LEAP, I always get accused of being a lobbyist. And I just go, oh my goodness, if I got paid 10 cents an hour for what I do, I don't, nobody understands that LEAP is a full-on 501c3. We don't have a political action group.
Not getting
we
paid.
We don't have paid lobbyists, and there's not a single board of director or LEAP speaker that gets paid other than maybe reimbursements for like hotel or something if they're flying us somewhere.
Now that's an organization.
To the very hefty salaries that lobbyists on the other side are making.
Oh, absolutely. Pharmaceuticals.
Oh my God.
What happened?
Did you freeze, Don?
It's so imbalanced. If you believe in the work that LEAP is doing, and you believe in the work that Americans for Safe Access is doing, chip in a little cash.
Support them.
Oh, absolutely.
Support.
I'd love to have a full-time staff working in California. That would be great.
Yeah, you've been saying that for years, Don Duncan, and the money has not appeared for that, but it does appear for the police officers because it's coming out of...
It's coming out of our money.
Of our own money, yeah.
And I think that's what irritates me more than anything.
Yeah.
This is every time I deal with a Sabet or a Chabot, is you are getting my taxpayer money for a position that I don't support.
That I disagree with.
And I disagree with. My money should not be allowed as a taxpayer to go to positions that I don't support.
I agree with that 100%.
Do you think we'll hear more about that as this becomes more open and into the light? I mean, I do think that, again, we're hearing more stories about this, and these lobbyists are becoming more known because we're hearing more stories in the media about this. Do you think that somehow they get called out on this kind of thing?
Yeah, I think people are.
I think you're not the only person that's frustrated.
No. And absolutely. And I think that's the importance of groups like ASA and, is normal and, it's that coalition building. I think that, and I think I've had this discussion before, it's called the force multiplier, that the more we work together as a coalition and cooperatively and collectively. I'll use
Absolutely.
those puns,
I like
okay?
it. We like it.
Is that our voices are going to be amplified over the drones of the what about the children
Right.
and the lies and the mischaracterizations
Gateway drug.
and the gateway drug and the crime caused by dispensaries. All that stuff will end.
I look forward to that.
I do too.
From your lips to God's ears,
Yeah,
Diane.
I tell you.
We it looks like we might have lost Don. It looks like he's trying to reconnect here, but we'll do this without him. We do a segment on here called Dope of the Week. And every week we pick out one of the stories that we've seen and just sort of shame, and
pothole?
sometimes
like a
sometimes there's a
Leaky
plethora.
pothole.
Sometimes there's a plethora of material, and sometimes there's not. But this week, I personally want to call out Dish Network as our dope of the week. They have a case going on with Brandon Coates, a paraplegic who was working for them, working pretty well for them. No complaints, no nothing. But one day they drug tested him, and lo and behold, Brandon takes medical marijuana for his paraplegicness.
Neuropathic pain, I'm sure.
For many reasons, this
Ending
helps
reasons.
him. And they fired him. They fired him simply because he uses marijuana, not because of a work problem, not because he used it on the job.
Yeah.
It was just a plain old, this is our policy, we have zero tolerance, we can't make an exception for the paraplegic who needs this medicine to function.
How do people sleep at night when they make those kind of decisions?
This case is now going up before, it's been on track to go to the Supreme Court in the state of Colorado, and this is in Colorado, where marijuana is now 100% legal. This guy cannot hold his job, and he was fired back in 2010, I believe.
Barry, this is something we're going to face. We already face in medical cannabis states, in most of them, and in the legalization states as well, is that laws that protect you from criminal prosecution do not protect you from discrimination. We have the exact same problem here in California, where our Supreme Court allows people to be fired for using medical cannabis, even if their use is legal.
But I mean, if you look at I understand broad policy, but when you need to look at specifics and how it affects people's lives, there has to be someone at Dish Network that can say, there has to be some exceptions for this when we have
Common sense.
Common sense paraplegic that's
Yeah.
using this, that's been a productive worker, never found to be working high at work, that they could make, instead of going through this costly, lengthy legal, they could resolve this, and they're just not doing it. That's why I feel they're dope for the week. Yeah, Don, what were you going to say? I don't want to cut you off.
I could say they could choose to. They could choose to make an exception here, but they don't.
But they're not. And
You know what's and I think there's so many things that are interesting about this, because if we really are going to treat cannabis like alcohol, we need to do the same thing for alcohol on the job. And I think we're going to get there eventually, and it may not be soon enough for some people, but I think those are things that we need to deal with and work with.
But the science of it, even if they do that, alcohol on the job, if you drink Friday night, when you come in Monday
Correct.
and you get tested, you're going to be fine.
Yeah, but we shouldn't be tested. That's my whole.
Then
That's
let's
my,
go there.
That's
I'm
my
happy
whole.
for that.
That's my whole point.
Yeah.
Is it's the federal government that has imposed the zero tolerance standard across all our industries.
I do believe there are employer organizations, though, especially in Colorado, that I've been reading with this particular case, that do not want
to drug test their people.
Yeah,
They can choose not to.
But they can choose not to. But the people that want to drug test people, they want their right to drug test their employees, and they don't want to give up that right. And I do think it's going to be difficult, with just like the League of Cities makes it difficult for has made it difficult for medical marijuana due to in conjunction with banning and that kind of thing in the cities. I think that these employer organizations are going to cause a real headache for that.
So here's my throw out to maybe what we ought to do then is, until all of law enforcement agrees to random drug testing, then nobody should be drug tested, because I will tell you that law enforcement from a collective
great idea.
from a collective bargaining standpoint never agrees to it unless they gain something.
Right.
It's all done through a union contract.
So these guys have guns and they're running around the community and there's no drug
testing for
Not
them?
all of them. It depends on specific agencies, but it's all done through a collective bargaining agreement, unless, of course, there's probable cause to believe that you've done something. So then you're treated just like any other ordinary citizen.
Wow. Diane, This has been a fascinating conversation,
Yes.
as always, with
always.
you. We never have enough time to get through everything and really do it in a complete way. We're thinking about maybe doing a monthly leap segment on our Talking Marijuana.
That'd be
And
great.
We'd love to talk more about that and get that going because you just have so much great
world of
information.
information.
And your organization is doing such great work, and we applaud and thank you so much for coming on the show this
Thank you,
week.
Diane.
No, we love you guys. Thank you very much, Barry, Yami, Don. We'll
Bye,
talk
everybody.
offline about a lot of different stuff.
Pura vida.
Pura vida. Thank you all. We'll see you next week.
You are listening to the John Lovitz Vodcast Network.
Upcoming shows to the John Lovitz Vodcast Network.
Welcome to FYI. It's Dimitri Young here with Robert Fick.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to Talking Marijuana.
Hi, everybody. Crabman's Rock and Roll Revival featuring Frazier Smith is on the air, in your hair, and going out everywhere around the world.
I'm Gary Garver, live from the John Lovitz Comedy Club.
This is the John Lovitz Vodcast Network.